the 61st Annual ISNA Convention, the American Muslim, Forging Faith and Action.
My name is Raheela Ahsan. I will be the moderator for today's panel, and we'll get started soon. I just wanted to lay out some housekeeping. So as guests come in, if they could come to the front, our panel will be around 1 hour, and then towards the end, we'll make room for 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A. For ease of question and answer, we're gonna actually have a submission link, which you guys can all anonymously submit questions to, which our panelists will answer at the end of our session here. And then towards the end, ISNA would also like you guys to fill out a feedback survey. Because we will be discussing political and legal issues today, I did want to make it clear that all the views today expressed are the panelists' own, and they don't represent ISNA, nor do they constitute any form of legal advice. So, Bismillah. May Allah make this a beneficial gathering for all of us and accept all of our efforts. Ameen. I'm going to begin by giving the introductions for each of our panelists, and I would like for you to hold your applause until I'm finished with all their introductions, and then we can all applause together. Starting from my right and then moving further down, we have Mr. Salam Al-Marayati. He is the president and co-founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Council. He is an expert on Islam in the West, Muslim reform movements, human rights, democracy, national security, and Middle East politics. He has spoken at the White House, Capitol Hill, and represented the US at international human rights and religious freedom conferences, as well as been featured in every national news publication from the New York Times to the Wall Street Journal. Moving on, we next have Mazen Basrawi. He is a trial attorney in the Housing and Civil Enforcement section of the Department of Justice, specifically the Civil Rights Division, where he enforces the Fair Housing Act and the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. Notably, he litigated United States v. Rutherford County, Tennessee, guaranteeing the right of the Islamic Center of Murfreesboro to open its mosque despite intense opposition, which later became the subject of a CNN documentary entitled Unwelcome, The Muslims Next Door. Next, we have Mr. Wael Alzayat. He is the CEO of Engage, where he provides strategic and operational guidance and management for the organization. He is based in Washington, D.C., and Alzayat previously served with distinction as a U.S. Middle East policy advisor at the U.S. Department of State for 10 years, including a senior policy advisor to the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, and Syria outreach coordinator with Ambassador Robert Ford. Lastly, we have Mr. Farhan Latif. He is the president of the El Hibri Foundation, and he is a Harvard-educated philanthropic leader and social entrepreneur who focuses on fostering inclusion across religious and political divides, with extensive experience advising government agencies, promoting interfaith understanding, and combating extremism. You can applaud now. I'd just like to remind the guests who are coming in from the back if you could kindly fill in the seats towards the front. Thank you. So to begin with, our topic is going to cover political and civic engagement for Muslims in the United States. Oftentimes, we view this as an option that Muslims have the luxury of being involved in politics, whereas we face a lot of competing views on this. Today, ISNA has asked us to argue and represent that perhaps it's an obligation for Muslim Americans to be involved in both our political system and civic engagement. To begin with, we're going to turn this over to Mr. Salam Marayati, who's going to give us a background regarding the Prophet's Sunnah, peace be upon him, and what he encouraged for Muslims in terms of political involvement.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Rehan, for that generous introduction, and ISNA for this wonderful convention and this panel. The Prophet, ﷺ, of course, he followed the Quran. And right in the Quran, it tells you, it's a command. It's in the imperative. It says, ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة حسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. Invite people to the way of your Lord with wisdom and beautiful admonition. And when you argue with them, come up with something that is better. In other words, don't just go back and forth and be in a circular conversation, but always try to achieve something better. And I think that's the model that we have to choose today. Now, let me ask, and you don't have to answer out loud, just you can think on your own. How much money do we spend on relief, sending food and blankets and needs for the dispossessed, refugees, victims of war? Probably hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And if you look at the booths, most of the bigger booths are the ones who actually represent those relief organizations. And then how much do we spend on building mosques? Again, millions of dollars that we spend. And now there's mosque expansions, $20 million here, $30 million there. Then when we ask, how much do we spend on civic engagement? And I usually get a query look like, I don't know. And how much do we spend on coalition building? Yet this is what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did to protect his community, especially in Mecca. He dealt with tribal leaders of all types. It wasn't like, oh, you're a conservative, so I won't deal with you, or you're too progressive, so I won't deal with you. He dealt with whoever had power to bring protection to his group so that they could have room and air to breathe and develop and become the great leaders that they became later. And I think that's where we are today. It's not so much, are we Democrat, or are we Republican, or are we going to be independent, or every time an election comes, it's like a horse race. Then the horse wins, or he loses, and then we either we're ecstatic, or we have indigestion, and then we realize, you know what, that horse is not what I thought it was. We endorsed Bush in 2000. What did we get? We got the Gulf War, and we got the Patriot Act. We endorsed Biden in 2020. What did we get? We got the Gaza genocide, and now there's going to be legislation that is going to be suppressing our students. We even had Obama in 2008. He did not meet with Muslims until the last 6 months of the 8th year of his presidency for fear of backlash from right-wing groups for meeting openly and publicly with Muslims. So we have to understand that that's the reality of politics and not put so much emotions into it. In the 90s, we worked on the Bosnian issue, and we did exactly what we're doing now. We're sending food and blankets. And the Bosnians turned to us and said, excuse me, the food and blankets are not going to save us. What we need you, American Muslims, to do is to tell the United States government to change the policy in Bosnia so we can defend ourselves. And that is exactly the situation we're in today. Yes, food and blankets are important. Relief is important. We should give to the needy. We should give to the poor and the dispossessed. But there are other categories of zakat that we completely omit in terms of our annual giving. For example, there's a category of zakat that says you can give to liberation causes. There's a category of zakat that says you can give to soften the hearts of others. These are all in the Quran, and we have to apply it. And definitely the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did exactly that. So each politician at the end of the day is working for him or herself. Don't get into this ideological back and forth about, you know, what's in the best interest of this group if we go here. We should plan for whatever situation arises after November 5th or November 5. And then we are better prepared to move for the interests of our community, whether it's a Trump presidency or a Harris presidency or what have you. So I've now become, astaghfirullah, politically agnostic. And I don't believe that we should all be in one party. In fact, it's not happening. The reality is you have people who support Jill Stein. You have people who support Kamala Harris, the Black Muslim Leadership Council endorsed her. The Muslim Women Caucus endorsed her. And you have people who are supporting Trump. So in our community, you're going to find all. So unity is not conformity. Unity is managing differences of opinion and the different channels that we have in the contours of politics to leverage all of them that serve the interests of our community. So whoever wins, you go to that group and you say, okay, what are you going to deliver for our community now? If you endorse, what are we getting for our community if there is an endorsement? Are we going to get an appointment to a cabinet level position? Are we going to make sure that Islamophobes are not going to be running policy in the administration? Those, to me, are the most important decisions that have to be made, regardless of who wins in the presidential elections. And by the way, these elections are important, not only for the presidential elections. The most important elections to me are my local elections. My local elections, people that have access to the city council, my state representatives, people that can fend off the federal government if they invade my civil liberties, people I can leverage and say, we need a resolution that demands that our community is protected, that our students are protected from this legislation that's going to come down that equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So local elections are just as important, if not more important, than the national elections. And Tip O'Neill even said, the famous Speaker of the House in the 80s and 90s, he said, all politics is local. So let's think about that. And the last thing I want to say is that when Martin Luther King tried to negotiate with John F. Kennedy for civil rights legislation, he failed. So what did he do? He turned to his community and created a movement and had the march in Selma, and he had the march in Washington. And then that forced Lyndon Baines Johnson to finally enact civil rights legislation. Harry Truman said it. He told one of his constituents, says, now you've convinced me that you are right. Now force me to do what you want me to do. And that is the main objective is to empower our community, to force these politicians to act on what is moral, what is Islamic. And people are saying, well, maybe voting is not for us, I'm not going to vote. You're actually voting even when you don't vote. You're just allowing somebody else to vote for you. We pay taxes. Our Islamic obligation is to make sure that our tax dollars are used for the Islamic purposes of justice, mercy, and compassion. When they are not used for that, we are failing as an ummah, as a community. And so it is our obligation to advocate for that and to vote for those people that align with our values of justice, mercy, and compassion.
Thank you, and thank you for that overview. Something you mentioned earlier, so you did a really great job of walking us through, I think, maybe blunders in the Muslim American community in terms of our foreign policy, especially in the 90s and early 2000s. I want to open this next question up to the rest of the panel, and transitioning now to at least the last 20 years, what have you guys all seen as the trajectory for the Muslim American voting bloc since the incidents on 9/11?
Salam alaikum, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Generally speaking, after 9/11, you saw the Muslim American community, in a way, be at an inflection point of asking itself, how did we end up here? How did these policies get put into place that harm us, whether it's the Patriot Act that Salam mentioned, or secret evidence that was used, or the targeting of Islamic charities as well as organizations. And that drove, and I'm very proud of this, and I think many of you would agree, many of us to enter the civic and political space. You saw an increased participation of Muslim Americans in government, in campaigning, in politics, but it was still at a low level, but it was definitely increasing. And I would say the second shock for all of us was the election of Donald Trump. As you all remember, in 2017, everyone woke up and we asked ourselves, how did this happen? Do we know our fellow citizens who elected this man who essentially campaigned on the promise of banning people like us? And then again, and this is a proud moment for all of us, despite the pain and despite the challenges, you saw another resurgence of people stepping up, resisting, fighting, running for office. A historic number of Muslim American women have been running for office since 2017 and winning at the local, state, and federal level. And I say this as someone who's very conscious that I'm sitting on an all-male panel right now, and I think some of them should be sitting with us right now telling us about their experiences. And so, but there's been, despite this movement and elevated consciousness, I think you're still seeing fragmentation in our community, and we can talk about this a little bit more. There are some structural issues that we're dealing with as a community. We say we are diverse, which is a source of pride and beauty in Islam. But that means reaching consensus not only on the issues that affect us, but on how to achieve them. It can be challenging. And here there are global movements against Muslims, whether they're here or elsewhere. Global Islamophobia is a real problem. Global white supremacy is a real problem. And growing populism across the world is a real problem that is directly aimed at the gains that our communities have been making and the struggles that we have been making since the 9/11 era. And we can get a bit more into that. But I think it's been a mixed bag. We're obviously facing a very serious setback right now with the Gaza genocide and what's happening there and how that's impacting us here. But I am personally optimistic about our community. I think the arrow is pointing in the right direction. More Muslims in America are stepping up. They're running for office. They are joining government. They are working in think tanks. They are shaping the views of the public and participating in the policy deliberation. So I'm hopeful despite this very, very challenging moment.
Just also, I want to add that after 9/11, we saw more outreach from the mosques. And I think that was the positive step. We saw more Muslims run for office. We got, alhamdulillah, we had Keith Ellison, then Rashida and Ilhan. Of course, Andre Carson was already there. And we have more Muslims now represented. And we're only 1.5% of the population. So if you take 1.5%, we're already at that representation. What we want is disproportionate representation, of course, like every community does. But the reality is we're not going to ever achieve a majority in this Congress, at least not for now. And so it's more important to support the non-Muslim candidates who align with our values than just supporting Muslims. And every week I get a call, oh, a Muslim is running for Congress, a Muslim is running for Senate. Just because you're running for office and you're a Muslim doesn't mean that the community should give you money. You have to prove yourself. First of all, you have to prove that you are serving your local district. What's your strategy in winning the vote of your district? Then, of course, with that, the community should support. But there's no way that we're going to be able to support every candidate. And I think not enough effort, like we had Jamal Bowman lose. Cori Bush, he lost too, right? And so we're losing allies right now. And the reality is AIPAC still controls the Congress. They dictate, and so members of Congress and the White House, the whole executive branch of the government, they make decisions based on fear of AIPAC rather than even the interests of the United States of America. And that's the grip that we have to unlock. That is our mandate today. And if there's a Muslim voting bloc, that's the one thing that no special interest group, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or Christian, should exploit religion for the political purpose of suppressing everyone. AIPAC even suppresses Jewish voices that are against the occupation. AIPAC obviously is coming after Muslims now. They went after Brenda Abdel Al, who is now the representative for Kamala Harris for what she said 20 years ago as a college student. So you're going to see more and more of that coming. And it takes some keen strategy to leverage the votes that we do have, again, in coalition with others, to say no to fear. We have broken the barrier of fear. We are not fearful. Many of our allies are not fearful. But the American public and the politicians, they're still fearful. And that's what we have to break immediately.
I think before we get into maybe future solutions on how we can combat our problems, I did want to go back to, I think, Mazen, did you have any points that you wanted to add?
Yeah, so, Assalamu alaikum. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Sayyidina Mursaleen. It's a real pleasure to be on this esteemed panel, and thank you to ISNA for inviting me. I'm here as an attorney for the Department of Justice, where I've served for the last 15 years. And we sort of started this part of this conversation by talking about what happened on 9/11. I was in my third week of law school when 9/11 happened, and I went to law school to be an environmental lawyer. I had a degree in environmental science as my undergrad, and I went to a school where I thought I was going to go into trying to help solve the problems that I still believe are the greatest challenges the civilization faces in the 21st century. But after 9/11 happened, it became evidently clear to me and many people like me in the Muslim community who were in law school at the time that we needed civil rights lawyers to protect our community from the onslaught of what we now call Islamophobia. At the time, we called it sort of post 9/11 backlash. And I eventually became a civil rights lawyer, started my career as a disability rights lawyer, went into private practice for a while at a large firm and found that really quite unfulfilling. And I then joined then President Obama's historic campaign, which by some fluke of history we actually won, and then eventually joined the administration as counsel to then Assistant Attorney General and later Secretary of Labor Tom Perez. We were dealing with a lot of backlash, Islamophobia, hate crimes. In 2010, there was the issue around what was the so-called World Trade Center Masjid, which of course was not actually at the World Trade Center, which began a nationwide assault on our religious institutions, something that was really unheard of up until that point. And at the Department of Justice, I had the opportunity to address this type of hate through the work that I was doing. One of the trips that I took with Secretary Perez was to Nashville, Tennessee, where we organized a group of meetings with various local civil rights groups, and I organized a meeting with the Muslim community there. And we learned about a little town 60 miles outside of Nashville called Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where a local group of Muslims had outgrown their local storefront masjid and bought a farm and put a plan to build a masjid and community center, etc. And the town had made that zone where you could build a house of worship as of right. So they granted them the permits to build. And all of a sudden, the town was sued by a group of local citizens supported by some outside organizations that were known Islamophobes, filing a lawsuit against the city saying that they shouldn't have treated the masjid like a church or a synagogue, because Islam is not a religion. It is a political ideology bent on turning America into a Sharia state. The court held a hearing on a temporary restraining order that they asked for, where the question at hand was whether Islam was a religion. We at the Department of Justice found this whole process to be egregious, and we took an extraordinary step of filing a brief in a state court, because this was all in a local state chancery court in Tennessee, saying that it's the position of the federal government, all three branches, that Islam is a religion protected by the First Amendment and all applicable laws protecting religion and religious practice. The court denied the temporary restraining order, but in its opinion, it had a very odd phrase where it said, the question of whether Islam is a religion is outside the purview of this court. Well, we thought all's well that ends well, because the masjid was now allowed to build. 2 years later, the court held a hearing a month before they were set to open the masjid, then during Ramadan. This is about a dozen years ago now. And the court was packed with people that had supporting the people that sued the town, and asked the court to stop the masjid from opening. The court issued a very strange ruling which did just that. And it said that the town had violated the local rules that required advertising to the general public. Of course, they did the same thing that they do with every other building that was being built. They put in the newspaper, put it on the internet. But the court said that this was a matter that was of great public importance. And the question is, what was the matter of great public importance? Wasn't traffic, wasn't the building itself, wasn't particularly out of character for that area. It was just that it happened to be Muslims. And we then took another extraordinary step of filing for a case in federal court, asking a federal judge to overturn the state court judge in a temporary restraining order under the supremacy clause of the Constitution, because it would have been a violation of this law that maybe some of you have heard about, called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. RLUIPA is the acronym. And we succeeded in getting the court to agree with us and allow the masjid to open on time during Ramadan. The reason I tell this story is because it's an example of what can be done with public participation and public service. I've been in the federal government now for 15 years in a number of roles, mostly in the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice. And I can say without a doubt that being in the room when decisions are made about what cases to bring, why matters like what happened in Murfreesboro are important for the federal government to take action in to defend the rights of all citizens, including Muslim Americans, that my voice being there in the room made a difference. And I'll wrap up, okay. All right, before the hook comes and takes me away. The bottom line that I'm trying to raise here is that public service is an imperative for our community. And it's not necessarily running for office. It's also serving in the federal government, the state government, the local government, as teachers, firefighters, police officers, serving our community and bringing our values that we have as Muslims to public service.
Very good. Yes. Okay. Can we get a request for another microphone up here, please? Mr. Basrawi, thank you so much for sharing that experience, and thank you so much for being a legal advocate for Muslims here in America. I really appreciate all the work that you do. And I think this highlights the earlier comments you guys all made, which is that there are a lot of challenges, but it seems that as Muslims in America, we've been seeing a lot of increasing acceptance and maybe more political leeway to accommodate for our needs or our maybe wants or requests in politics that tended to be ignored. And so I think in a way, almost post 9/11, we've seen a lot of forward progress. That being said, and I think this transitions us into our next topic, we do, as a community, face a lot of complex and diverse issues, and it would be almost impossible to categorize us as one large voting bloc or coalition. What do you believe are, or do you even believe there is a possibility for us to be a Muslim monolith, or like one ummah, as is the messaging for Muslims in the US? You can have my mic.
Should we hear from Farhan, maybe?
Assalamu alaikum, and really appreciate the remarks from the panelists. And Raheela, thank you so much for moderating this panel. And for those of you who are still listening between your Amazon shopping for Labor Day, it's great to have you here. When we think about the Muslim community or communities, I think it's really important to get a sense of like who we are as a community or communities. And when you look at some of the research from ISPU and from Pew, we get some sense of the contours of the community that exist here, which is that we're about, 4.5 million Muslims according to one study, 11 according to another, but we tend to use the 4.5 number. We're made up of, for the sake of ease, quarters of communities of African American, Black, South Asian, Arab, Latino, white, and other communities. Some people have been here since the transatlantic trade. Others arrived last week. And some people, claim this place as home, and others still sometimes live with a mindset that they're heading back once the time is right, and still fantasize about going back to other places. And we have people who are leading our communities and imams who have been born and raised here, and some individuals who are following guidance from people overseas for day-to-day practices and for guidance. So all of this to say that we're a very diverse communities, and what that means is that although we have a lot in common from a faith-based perspective, from that lens, we also have a lot of priorities across the spectrum. I know, having traveled across the nation and meeting with Muslim communities, and even if you look at this room here today, if I ask people in this room here, what is your top 5 or top 3 issues look like? And we put it up on the wall here or on the screen, what we'll see is we'll see some similarity given the conflict or the genocide that's going on right now, that people will raise their hand on the issue of Gaza. But after that, you'll start seeing a split of priorities and issues that come up that impact you and your lives. And it depends who you ask, and they will give you a set of issues that they deeply, deeply care about. So one of the challenges that comes about for us is the issue of prioritization, and also not falling into the trap of what they call oppression Olympics, where one community is trying to say that my issue and my suffering is greater than yours, but rather understanding that we have to embrace the challenges and issues of all of our communities and carry water for one another. If you walk outside this bazaar right now and you see some of the posters from the Rohingya and from other places of Kashmir, there are tons of challenges and priorities that we have to be thinking about, as well as the domestic issues dealing with food insecurity, poverty, climate, and other issues that we also care about. So the challenge becomes, in some cases, our faith and principles and values might be very similar, but when it comes to priorities, we have a spectrum. And the question becomes, how do we negotiate our priorities in a way that creates collective wins for all of us, but also not fracture as a community and communities on the conversations around prioritization and on the question about moving issues forward.
I'll pick up on where Farhan left off. Engage is a civic organization. What does that mean? It can mean a lot of things. We're really focused on empowering the Muslim community to use that collective action, not necessarily as a block, but that collective action to demonstrate that it's a community that votes. Voting is perhaps the most fundamental right that we have as Americans, as citizens of our democracy. And when we think about the common values that can bring us all together, with Muslims and those who are not Muslim, it has to be support and belief in our pluralistic democracy. That is the foundational element for us. If we lose that, we have no shot at addressing any of those domestic or foreign policy issues. I myself, I served as a US diplomat for 10 years. I worked on Syria. I worked on Iraq. I worked on Egypt. I'm a passionate believer in democracy and human rights in the Arab world. Now, I know ISNA is not a partisan organization. Neither is Engage, actually. But when a candidate for public office, for president, stood before the American people and said, I will ban Muslims, and especially Syrian refugees, I knew that our pluralistic democracy was under threat. And when half of the country voted for them, I knew we're in deep trouble. And we have been in deep trouble ever since. The problems did not begin when Donald Trump won or when 9/11 happened. It predates all of that. Clearly, there are systemic, structural problems in American society and with our foreign policy. As you have heard, and I've gotten to know the amazing Mazen here sitting next to me and others like him, and Salam al-Marayati, who's been at the forefront of civic engagement. People matter. It's people. It's not that complicated. Do you want, you as in Muslim America, do we want people who uphold certain values in important positions that impact all of our lives as Muslims, as Americans, and as human beings, as global citizens? I care just as much regarding how US weapons are used anywhere in the world. In this moment, it's Gaza. Tomorrow, it might be somewhere else. It's still our money. We're still going to be judged based on that. And I'm also very concerned about what's happening here. I have a 4-year-old. I don't know about you. I'm terrified of her going to school because I don't want her to get shot by an assault weapon, right? And I think in between all of that, there are issues that matter to all of us. And so how do we resolve them? Is it necessarily that we must all fall in line and vote as a bloc? That's never going to happen, and that is okay. What's important is that we as American Muslims put our actions where our values are. We are a community that will vote every election, no matter what happens. We're a community that's going to engage our government. It's nobody's government, it's ours. We're paying for it. Doesn't mean we agree with it. We are principled and we engage with those values. And also, we will participate in the policy deliberation that impact all of us. Some folks will do it with the Republican administration. Some folks will do it with the Democratic administration. Maybe in the future we'll have a Green Party administration, right? But everyone knows that about us. And if we're looking for allies, if we're looking for respect, sometimes a little bit of fear, because in politics you need to have consequences and accountability. We at Engage believe that is the best way forward, is we are an engaged citizens in our pluralistic democracy, no matter what the results are.
And I want to I want to jump in here real quick and just follow up with these comments. My next question is a subset of that, which is, what do each of you feel might also be the biggest barriers that are stopping maybe Muslim Americans from having more influence?
All right, I can start with that last one. I think part of it is sometimes a recognition that we may not be able to achieve 100% of our goals, or even 50% of our goals by participating, but sometimes achieving 20% of our goals is a win. And I, for example, I recently completed a detail at the White House, and it was a very difficult time. I did my best to be the voice of our community and to bring the voice of our community into the White House in a very difficult time. And my experience was that there are a lot of people that didn't want to talk at all. And I understand that. I understand the anger that's out there. I have many of those feelings myself and had many of those feelings myself. But the reality is, you know, empty chairs don't speak. And if we don't speak to people who are willing to listen to us, who exactly are we going to speak to? Step one is to talk to the people that are willing to listen to us. Anybody else want to have?
Go ahead.
No, thank you, Mazen. And really, you know, the question is, what are the biggest challenges? And I think, know thyself, right? Let's look inward a little bit at how much time are we spending as individuals or organizations tearing each other down, disagreeing unethically with one another, undermining each other because there's no conformity. We could be of different ideas. We could be of different minds, but we all have the same idea, don't we? We want respect. We want protection for our religious practices. We want to be equal citizens under law. And we want humane and principled U.S. foreign policies abroad, including toward the Palestinians. That's what we want. How do we get there? There are many ideas of how to get there. And which means is that we have to recognize there are multiple, in fact, we insist that there has to be multiple strategies: resistance and engagement. I know a story of MLK that he signed some civil rights legislation bill, but it did not go far enough. He walked outside and marched with the protesters right after he signed that document with Johnson. And so what that tells me is that we need that dual strategy. In fact, multiple strategies. There's also something I'm gonna add here as a product of the Middle East. I was born and raised in Syria. I'm an immigrant. I'm a first-generation immigrant. We talk about colonialism. Colonialism is still alive and well today. And all too often it's alive with us. Here's how it works and how it's a barrier. We refuse to believe that there's a possibility that us as Muslims, or as brown people, or Arab people, or whatever it is, are capable and have our own agency to make change. Things often just happen to us, right? So if we make some progress, somebody somewhere must have made it happen on our behalf. And that is a colonial mindset. So when we see a brave Muslim American enter the White House, or join the State Department, or work at another government agency, or represent their community, and I mean their entire constituency in Congress. Now, unless they're doing something bad, obviously, we should celebrate it. We should empower them, and we should look to get them even more support and get more young leaders into the path that they trailblazed. And so, before I talk about what others are doing to us, I think it's important for us to look inward and believe that we can do it. We are doing it, and we just need to do more of it. What we're seeing right now is a test for our community. This is a specific problem, in fact. My assessment, this is a fight for the future trajectory of the Democratic Party. Our community, for better or worse, has made 20-year investment in running for office as Democrats, joining Democratic administrations, working for democratic campaigns, working for foundations that supports democratic progressive causes. That doesn't mean we don't need to do it on the Republican side. We do. I want to say that again. We do. However, that does not mean we abandon the 20-year project we've been on with the Democratic Party. And that is why the other side is so vicious. They want us out. And we ain't leaving. We can't leave. We're doubling down.
I think also, in a larger sense, I think one of the problems is that these political groups or political parties, they may like us, but they don't respect us. They like us because we're nice people. They like us because they get to have biryani when they come to the mosque, or a kebab, or it's Ramadan, and they all get fat because they're not fasting, and they get to have these fancy dinners and things like that, and they go, oh, okay, let's do an Eid at the White House and things like that. But when it comes to making policy decisions, we're not respected, and we have to demand respect. That's the one thing that we have to achieve now. That to me is the immediate goal. Now, the fact that the student protesters and the uncommitted delegates forced the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to step down from his candidacy for the President of the United States, that is respect. But it's just the first step. It's one step. So everywhere we go, I don't want people to like us. Of course you want, but I want them to respect us first, then like us, not like us and disrespect us. And the Prophet, again, back to the example of the Prophet ﷺ, when he went to Medina, he demanded respect from all the tribes. When he started in Medina, the majority were not Muslim. Medina was not a Muslim city. It was still Kafir, Jews, Christian, whatever. So all these mushriks that he had to deal with. So that's pluralism. What we need from our scholars, by the way, we need the sunnah of the mu'amalat in engaging others. We have a lot of sunnah on the ibadat, the worship, but we don't have enough sunnah on how to do social interaction in an effective way. That's what we need. And he spent a lot of time with youth. So if I were to invest, exactly what Wael said, I would be sending young people to Washington. I'd be sending young people to Hollywood. I'd be sending young people to New York. And I would have scholarships and stipends for the best and brightest and start becoming that pipeline into the decision-making and public opinion-shaping process of America. That will affect a change. And then the last thing, I think we need a tweak in how we orient ourselves. Instead of just thinking, okay, support the Muslims, support them, we have to do what's good for the Muslims, we should start thinking about what's good for the broader society. Again, like the Prophet ﷺ did, he was looking at what's good for all of his people. There are two things. People want to feel secure, people want to prosper. You want a unifying movement? How do we help people feel secure? Even Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he built the Kaaba, what did he pray for? He said, oh Allah, please give the prosperity for my future generations and make them feel secure. So that's right out of the Quran. It's nothing new. We just have to apply it. Islamic information is not just for us to hear the beautiful recitation of the Quran. It's the words that are infused into our hearts that transform us to go and do the work. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. What is the best speech but those who invite to the way of your Lord and do good work and righteous deeds and say, I am at the forefront of those who submit to God Almighty. So da'wah, brothers and sisters, is not about converting people to Islam. Dawah is about freeing people so they can make that choice and connect with God's spirit that is in each and every one of us. That's the change we have to make to serve America. That will benefit Islam, and then that will make us all feel more secure, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Salam. Three things that are going to help us, in addition to what has been shared, to kind of move forward. And when we look at the barriers, I want to just ask everybody in the audience, can I see a show of hands of how many people are going to be voting on November 5th? Is there a show of hands? MashaAllah, that's everybody. That's incredible. If you didn't raise your hand, we'll come talk to you afterwards. There are three things that we should be really thinking about as we look ahead and in addressing the barriers. Number one, you've got to go out and vote. And local, state, national, it's really important that we do that. And take that day off, plan it from now, and please go ahead and make that happen. You want to create power for our communities and in society, that's a really, really important step. Number two is building strong institutions. That's a really important aspect as well. I was sitting in this audience after 9/11 as a student, watching Salam and others speak, and grew up through these organizations, right? And we need strong institutions. If you look at the country, we did a mapping through our foundation, and in addition, looking at the work that Dr. Sharik has done, there's 7,000 American Muslim nonprofits in this country, okay? 7,000. 3,500 of them are mosques and Islamic schools and religious centers. The rest, 3,500, are organizations like the one sitting on stage. However, the operating budget, the average operating budget of our organizations is about $500,000 with 2.5 staff. Did you guys know that? 2.5 staff members, $500,000 operating budget. Now, folks here on the panel are an exception, but that's the institutional power that you have. And if you're trying to compete with organizations that have a $300 million operating budget and 500 staff, you're really at odds in trying to create a difference. And so my recommendation is for our communities is that, yes, we want to see short-term, immediate change. You know, after 9/11, everyone was like, I want change tomorrow. And after 10/7 in the UK, people were like, I want change tomorrow, 7/7. And now 10/7 is another entry point to activism and engagement. But we have to play and see change today, but we also have to work towards it, towards incremental progress. And building strong institutions is another step to getting there. And then the last point is committing leadership and people to the work. Salam mentioned this idea of fellowships and internships in DC. We still need to see more American Muslim families give a child away to public service, to nonprofit work. We need the best and the brightest. We need the best and the brightest. Each family matters. And so that's the third thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, this, I think, helps us transition into our final topic here. And I think this is a good point to remind the audience that if you do have any questions, please submit them now, because then we'll start our Q&A portion in about 15 minutes. So I want to bring up two quotes from this week. Number one is Mr. Alzayat, I think it's referencing a conversation we had earlier this week where you had mentioned that local leaders and our imams do a really good job of telling, you know, the average Muslim all the things that we stand against, but they hardly ever educate us on things that we stand for. And as Muslim Americans, we're often told about very vague notions of social justice or, you know, equality. We're not really given the specifics of what that actually means. I want to combine that with a second quote. So I had the privilege of speaking with Imam Zaid Shaker earlier this week. And he had said that the best way to see progress is if we saw a division of labor amongst Muslim Americans, in that not everyone should be or is meant to be doing everything. On a micro level, what does this actually mean, and how can we see progress?
So, no, thank you for that. What this looks like on the ground, I'll address the first part of the question, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues as well, because they all have important things to say on that, is that if we are serious about harnessing the collective power of the community, then somebody needs to turn out the voters. And that is a science as well as it is an art. And this means not just chatting on WhatsApp. It means someone has to have the data and knock on the doors and send the text messages to do the canvassing operations the other communities do. And that is the core function of Engage. The Million Muslim Votes campaign that many of you have heard about is essentially that. It is working with our state chapters across the country and partners. And this year, we have over 100 partners, by the way, that are going to be knocking on doors, calling you many times and texting you to make sure that you vote. That infrastructure is so important, and someone has to do it. Separately, the candidate support, vetting the candidates. Just because somebody says, I am great on this issue, well, how are they on those other issues? When we talk about social justice, are we talking about criminal justice reform? Are we talking about systemic injustices in our societies, police reform? Are we talking about equitable access to healthcare, protecting our environment, gun control, or gun safety, since I'm in Texas? All those issues matter, which means that we need experts who analyze those issues and understand where the candidates stand on those issues. It's very easy today for someone to stand here and get you to support them and like them because they will say the right things on Palestine. How are they on all the other issues? How are they on Kashmir? How are they on Syria? How are they on Yemen? Doesn't mean that they have to be perfect on all those issues. Sudan, where a genocide is also happening there. Doesn't mean that they will have to be perfect on all. They cannot. That is impossible, in fact, right? But take a broader look. The other piece is also on the advocacy. I'm a former policy official at the State Department. What kind of talent and skills and infrastructure do you need to advocate in an impactful way and harness the votes and the support for candidates in support of those policies? So each piece here really requires specialized organizations, with all due respect, not opinions, not activists on WhatsApp chats, and also not humanitarian organizations. I'm a Syrian, we have many doctors, alhamdulillah, but not physicians running foreign policy and political organizations. And the reverse is true. I would never go into an operating room and tell them I know what the heck I'm doing. So specialization is very important, but it's collective action, right? And trusting that those specialists are going to go do good by our issues as long as there's accountability and transparency. On the first part of your question, which was?
Our local leaders, like our imams.
Correct.
Yes.
That's really what it looks like, is making sure that when we say we are for social justice and freedom, we break it down. It does mean caring about the less fortunate in our society, and there are program policies. And here, people say it doesn't matter who you vote for. It absolutely does. I know who signed the executive order banning Muslims. And I also know who's sending 2,000-pound bombs to the Israelis right now, don't we? So it does matter who you vote for. It matters who you vote for at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And people say, well, I'm tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. Have you heard this? I have. All right, let's flip it. If you're tired of voting for the lesser of two evils, would you still vote for that is more evil? I wouldn't. And I don't think anybody should. I'll leave it there.
Mazen, do you want to say something?
Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I agree. I don't want any more conspiracy theory videos coming through my WhatsApp chat. I think we've had enough. That is not activism. And I don't know, I think people sometimes confuse just sending these, having these chats as work. It's not. It's actually very time consuming to go through them. And it's demoralizing. So we need to follow the Quran whenever you hear something that's concerning and could be damaging. Verify before you press share or like or anything like that. I think the silver lining, again, goes back to our youth. You all remember Eric Holder. He was the Attorney General for President Obama. And at that time, there were protests happening on campuses for what was happening in Gaza. And he says, you know, I used to occupy buildings when I was a student. And he became Attorney General. There is a president of the police commission in LA. He said, I used to occupy buildings when I was a student. And now look where he is. So the students of today are the leaders of tomorrow. The student leaders in these protest movements will be leaders for America because it's in them. They will be some type of leaders. We have to support them. They will be the city council and the members of Congress and the Senate, inshallah. That is where we have to put our support behind. And then the last thing I want to say about that issue is that we are working for the benefit of America and Islam in America. I'm not going to be able to solve any of these foreign policy issues, okay? I'm not going to be able to resolve all these complex issues that date back hundreds of years in what's happening in the Middle East and South Asia and Africa and everywhere else. But I am able to empower people that can be in position to resolve them in the future. So we should be always looking for the future. And to bring more of these young people into our mosques. We talk about justice so much, but when we come to the mosque, there is no sense or space for those who want to work for social justice. That's what we have to change, is to create that space instead of worrying about how they dress or who their friends are or what their thoughts are. We have to bring these young people into our mosques. The ummah, the community has changed. And thank you, Farhan, for reminding people how old I am. He was a student when I was speaking here. So, and now look at him. He's, alhamdulillah, mashallah, he's very good at what he's doing as a great leader, and all these colleagues are wonderful. Yes, they were young when I started. I've seen it all. But they wouldn't have made it if somebody hadn't supported them or encouraged them along the way. That's what we need to reconnect with our youth, inshallah.
I will say the following, and I'm going to say this expressly in my personal capacity here. We need to get outside of our own community. As Farhan mentioned, we're 4.5 million in this country. We can only succeed politically by building coalitions with people that agree with us. And that means, thinking about how we speak about issues so that we are not closing doors to people who would be our natural allies. It also means, standing for our friends, just as they stand for us, for their issues, when they don't, directly conflict with our values, but may not necessarily be the issues that we care first and foremost about. And it means being, being there on the issues that are not just Muslim issues, right? Standing for the concerns, as Wael mentioned earlier, about gun violence, about environmentalism, about healthcare, about a myriad of issues that our values inform us about, that we can help make a difference on if we're part of a bigger coalition, right? And I think that's a major barrier that we need to overcome as a community and be part of greater coalitions in order for our voice to be magnified through coalitions.
All right, last question here. I know each of you are respective in your communities or with your organizations, influential Muslim American leaders. I wanted for you guys to each of you to leave the audience with what your organization does and maybe any projects that you're working on. So
Thank you for calling me influential. You're probably the only person who thinks that. Definitely not influential when I'm home. I'm the least influential. But the program that I would like you to consider supporting is called the Congressional Leadership Development Program. We bring the best and brightest from our community from around the country, and we invest in them for 8 weeks in Washington, D.C. We provide them housing, we provide them transportation, food, and we get them jobs on Capitol Hill. They become congressional interns. So a Congress member will ask us for a Muslim to serve as an intern in that office. We find that person. We help pay for part of the stipend as well. And they spend 8 weeks learning. Then on top of that, there's a curriculum that we give them about the Islamic model of engagement. So that when they become successful, inshallah, they don't lose their Islam. You know how sometimes people become successful and they move away from the community, and so we want them to know that it's because of the Muslim community that helped them become successful. And that gives them a stronger American Muslim identity. Then after that, all the networking meetings and the gatherings that we have with other interns of other organizations, and they're meeting with people in Washington. Some of them land jobs on Capitol Hill and become a permanent part of that structure. So that's a way of enhancing Muslim representation on Capitol Hill by investing in American Muslim youth.
So the Civil Rights Division at the Department of Justice has a number of different areas of law enforcement. Hate crimes. We do religious land use, as I discussed. We do discrimination in education, in the workforce, particularly with public employees. We also investigate police departments for potential widespread policies that may violate the law for use of force, et cetera, and institutions. And we protect voting rights. And so just to make a plug here before I pass this on, it is critical for you to be able to be in touch with us and the Department of Justice to let us know what's going on, areas that the federal government needs to enforce the law where it's not. And we can't do that. The only way we know about cases at the Department of Justice is if we read about it in the newspaper, see it on TV, or hear from somebody who tells us about it. And so you need to be the people that tell us about it, what's going on in your communities.
As I've mentioned, Engage is a get-out-the-vote organization that seeks to harness our collective power in support of policies that we believe in. And so this is voter mobilization, it's voter education across the country, particularly in swing states like Michigan, Virginia, Pennsylvania, town halls, candidate forums, and it's also to support candidates that are good for our issues and good for the issues for this country and for the world, and to engage with the local, state, and federal officials on those policies, whether it is foreign or domestic. Our goal is to have impact on the policies that are affecting us every day, right? That are challenging us now, but also in an affirmative manner. When we say we are diverse, that means many of the answers, solutions to our society also lies with Muslim America. To address those issues, we have to be represented. And so voting, advocacy, and candidate support.
The job that I do, I didn't know it ever existed until I got older, which is giving out money and grant making and philanthropy. And so there's about 80,000 foundations in America, 44,000 private and public. And so part of the role in philanthropy is to find organizations that you think are doing incredible work and investing in them financially and doing grant making. So if anyone's interested in philanthropy, that's something that we want to help create a pipeline for people to enter that sector. Training more leaders, organizing the leaders to work effectively with one another, and I think most importantly, replenishing individuals who are working in this space by offering gratitude and hope. The work is very difficult. The people who do this work sacrifice a lot. And part of the work we do as a foundation is to express that gratitude and give people support and keep them going on the fight that needs to be done every single day, day and night.
Thank you. Can we get a round of applause for our panelists? Thank you guys for joining us. So I want to turn it over to Q&A. Thank you to our audience who submitted questions. We actually got nearly 50 questions, which is awesome. There are some overlaps, so no worries. I think one of the most popular questions that we've received is, and I'll quote this first one here, money and politics are intertwined. What is it going to take for us to have a super PAC that rivals the likes of APAC?
So the good news, there's already a super PAC. It's called Defend and Advance. There's a super PAC already defending and advancing our allies. The super PAC invested in Summer Lee to protect her seat in Pennsylvania. It invested in Jamal Bowman and invested in Cori Bush. Unfortunately, those did not work out as well. It's a matter of scaling it. It needs more money, but it also needs collective action. And other groups that do race for candidates being part of this network of supporting local, state, and federal. So the infrastructure is there. That's the good news. The expertise is there. Mashallah, you know, half the uncommitted movement is full of political experts, by the way, just FYI. Folks who've worked on campaigns, who have raised money, who have maybe ran for office themselves. And our organizations, MPAC, MGAGE, others, have that talent. And I know there are other groups starting their PACs and super PACs, and that's all great. What's going to be key is moving together in support of those difficult issues. If you really want to build a pro-human rights caucus at Congress, that's going to require a certain amount of money and scale of efforts that requires people coming together. But the super PACs are there. At least for ours, you can check it out, defendandadvance.com.
I fully support the super PAC, but I think we have to understand what the model is that the other side is employing. It's not just money and politics. They have people in media. They have people in nonprofits. They have people in academia. They have people on commissions. So it's an all-out strategy. It's a comprehensive strategy. I think, was it Farhan or one of them mentioned that we need these multiple strategies, multiple fronts. It's an all-out movement. And that's what we have to start, is a movement. Can't just sit here and say, oh, what a nice talk, and what a nice ta'leem, and I'm going to listen to the sheikh, and he's going to tell me blah, 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 and how good, and we say takbir, and the takbir gets louder and louder, as if we're like 95%, we're only 1%. So we have to start the work. And the good news is we don't have to raise as much money as they do, because they're holding up the wall that it now has cracks. The majority of the American public supports our side for the first time in American history, right? The majority of the American public. So to Mazen's point, we need to be in coalition with them. So engaging the others and forming a broad-based coalition on this issue, to me, is an important part of the strategy as well. Then when Engage puts money into Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, then it's a multiplier effect, right? And then you have a better chance of getting that representation in the Congress with that money by having this coalition building that is so important for us today.
Thank you. Okay, so I know during our talk we have strayed away from, of course, endorsing or throwing everything behind one political candidate, but in light of the election coming up in a few months, I think that is a question the audience has, is how can we at least make an informed decision on what candidate we choose, and should we even, I know you guys encouraged today that we should be going to go vote, but I think many of us do feel a little bit disillusioned or hopeless with going to the polls this year. What would you suggest?
You gonna suggest something? Or? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll say something.
I want to just address the macro question and let them talk about the specifics, which is around the question of hope. I think our communities are pretty down right now, and there are two things that, going back to what Salam kicked us off with, from a faith-based perspective, hope and resilience are two really important values that we need to remind ourselves of from a faith-based, faith-inspired community. And so having hope, having resilience, understanding incremental progress, that things take time and that we have to work towards them, and listening to our elders and learning from their experiences on that progress is critical. There are stories of resilience. If you listen and sit down and talk to the elders, you will hear about what they had and what they achieved, which should give us hope. And at the same time, the reverse mentorship is also important, with the young people telling us about the urgency of now and combining it with the experience of the past. But the last thing I just want to say on this is, there are two types of narratives that exist in the community. One is a contaminative narrative, and the other is a redemptive narrative. A contaminative narrative basically tells you, we're not going to succeed, we're losing, we've always lost, they all hate us, and it sucks away any type of agency and energy from a community. Any situation, DNC happened, contaminative narrative, we were not represented. But then there's a redemptive narrative which gives you energy, hope, and understanding of what you have achieved and gives you the energy and the fuel to go on to do the next thing. And the redemptive narrative on that front was, there were 5 Muslims who spoke there. There were people who were never represented who showed up. There were people outside organizing day and night and slept outside and moved issues and needles and the conversation in the press. And so every conversation can take a contaminative or a redemptive narrative. And I think as we look ahead right now, what our community needs a lot of is hope, resilience, and really the narratives that we can move the needle and move things forward.
I completely agree with that. And I really think as Muslim Americans, we must look at our black brothers and sisters and their struggle for emancipation and for their rights and equal protection under the law. And that struggle is still ongoing, isn't it? It's not finished. Systemic racism is still there. Police brutality is still there. Unequal treatment in our judicial system is still there. Yet they persist. Yet there is determination to keep moving and to make the best choices that they can make. And that is the least that we can do, which is, in this moment, what do we have agency over? We're not in charge, clearly, of the foreign policy decisions happening in our name. But we have a choice whether we're going to walk to the polls and cast a ballot. That we do. We have a choice to learn about these candidates and those parties and the differences between them. And there are differences. And to just say there are none, that's our shortcoming. There are differences that impact our lives. When the Muslim ban happened, was my first week at Engage in 2017. I had resigned government. Now I was a CEO of Engage, and there was a Muslim ban. Can you imagine? Well, you can imagine. You were there with us, weren't you? That week, and the months, and the years after. People were being deported in Dearborn, Michigan. Going back to Iraq. That's where they were being sent. There were families broken up. This is just one example, and it's not the only example. Our community is grappling with social issues right now, right? Gender issues, what kids are learning in schools. Those are important issues wherever you fall on that issue. That means we have to engage and we have to make the best decision that we can, given the options that we have. My view is that for this upcoming election, we have to ask ourselves, are we of the mindset that we need to burn down the system or live to fight another day? I choose the latter for me and for my community. I guess I'll stop there because you clapped.
Sit down.
No, I'm done.
All right.
Okay, next question.
Next question. So Mr. Latif, you're cited as an example, especially during our conversation here today. How can students or our younger audience become the future leaders that you guys are sitting on the couch before us and giving us information? I think a lot of us want to know actually actionable steps on what we can do to become the leaders of tomorrow.
I just jump on the stage here. Anyway.
Go ahead. Is it Farhan?
Yeah, I think that we need specialists, and you need to be a generalist. And what that basically means is you need to understand a lot of different things in a lot of different sectors and fields, but then you have to hone in on something that you want to become really good at. When I look at the election season right now and the campaigns that are going on, my hope is that if I could go back in time, I wish I had worked on a campaign. I wish I had gained those experiences of actually volunteering, learning, understanding fundraising, understanding canvassing, understanding how the politics and the structure works, and growing up through that. No, I wasn't even a citizen actually back then because I moved here as a child. But point basically is that learning and specializing makes you really helpful to the community and to the country.
Any other suggestions on how students can get involved?
Yeah, I mean, volunteer for campaigns, as you just heard, join civic organizations and nonprofits, take that fellowship, take that experience at different organizations, campaigns, you heard that. Journalism is a great field. Again, as an immigrant child, I know, but political science and history actually can take you places. International relation degrees as well. But there's no one path to do this. On the ground experience abroad with organizations, world travel is very important. Knowing languages is a very important skill, and not just to work for the CIA, but actually to come back as an expert who knows the lived experiences of other people and can be that expert that's needed in critical moments. And really, it's engaging with the world as it is. And so not to be only limited, as young leaders I'm talking about here, to just being inside of our community, right? That's important. Know your community, support your community, and then get out and learn about the rest of the world and how it functions and how it works. And hopefully you're rooted in both your dean as well as your principles and your cultural values or whatever it is. And we as a community, as Salam mentioned, and the programs they have is so important. And we have it in the sense of on-the-job training for canvassers and organizers and people running for office is we need to support this ecosystem. I couldn't afford to come to Washington when I was in college to just take an internship and not have a job. So who is going to be covering those expenses? That's what the Farhan Latifs of the world are trying to figure out. And those who are donating need to give money to organizations like Al-Hibri that are supporting organizations like MPAC and Engage and others. It's an ecosystem. It's a network, right, of hopefully people and organizations that are trying to do good.
Thank you. I have one last question, and we can conclude with this. And Mr. Marayati, I want to tie it back to what you mentioned at the beginning of our talk, which was, as Muslims, we need to find a way to earn respect or even demand respect from our leaders. A few of the questions that we received from our audience is, what would be the most salient issues or, I guess, the political agenda of the Muslim American community going forward? Let's say short term for the next 5 years.
The issue or the principle or what?
I guess to specify would be more, what are issues that we should focus on? And are those issues, or would they be issues that would encourage or demand respect?
Yeah, I think Mazen might even know some important issues that are happening in our government. If he wants to take a first crack at that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll start. Sorry, I didn't want to put him on the spot. All right. To me, what we work on, which we believe is the root, and Wael referred to it in terms of colonialism. When you look at Islamophobia, what drives Islamophobia? Islamophobia is not just people's hatred for Islam in the public. That's true for every community. It's true against Jews, against blacks, against Hispanics. Even white people there's some white people who feel that they're disadvantaged and discriminated against. It starts with Trump. He's at the front of the line of that. So it's not just about discrimination. It is a systemic policy that singles out Islam as having a problem with violence. That's the policy of the United States government right now. When you look at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence website on foreign terrorist organizations, all the groups that are mentioned are Muslim. No Hindu militant groups are there. And by the way, Modi is looking at Netanyahu and taking lessons from him on how to get away with genocide in the Indian subcontinent. So we have to be looking at the whole landscape, not just in Gaza, but the whole. This is affecting the whole region, and it's not limited to Palestine. Palestine is now the fulcrum, but it will spread. Number two, when we go to these policies, then, what does it create? It creates watch lists. It allows the government to go to you, and if there's mere suspicion of terrorism, not a criminal act, not a violation, but just mere suspicion, the government has the right to investigate, do surveillance, run confidential informants, sting operations in our community, because we are now designated under foreign terrorist organizations. Domestic terrorist organizations, they cannot do it with. They have civil liberties. So a white supremacist, which by the way is still the #1 threat to national security in America, are not being scrutinized because they are under domestic terrorism statutes and policies. So that is what we are fighting right now, to change the national security policy to stop singling out Muslims as the only quote-unquote potential threat. And this double standard between foreign terrorist organizations and domestic. And the ADL, if you follow, they called for an investigation of all pro-Palestinian student groups like SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, for quote-unquote material support of a foreign terrorist organization. They're leading us back to the 9/11 policies and using this case to apply it to our community now. That is, to me, the immediate threat in terms of changing the policy so that if there's a Muslim terrorist or a Hindu terrorist or a Jewish terrorist or a Christian terrorist or a white supremacist or whatever, let's look at them all the same and stop singling out Muslims and saying, oh, we're going to combat Islamophobia. No, it starts with the U.S. government itself. The last thing I want to say in general is that this is a multi-generational struggle. This is not going to be resolved tomorrow or next year or after this presidency or the next presidency. When Nuh alayhi salam built the ark, he fulfilled the mission, end of story. Ibrahim alayhi salam built the Kaaba, fulfilled his mission, end of story. Moses was told to leave Egypt, went into the desert, end of story. Isa alayhi salam delivered the word, he left, end of story. It wasn't until the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, thousands of years later, where he fulfilled the mission of all the prophets, and that's why we call him the seal of the prophets. It tells us yes, you must have hope, you must have resilience. God's word will prevail.
And I just want to add a quick comment that I know Muslim Legal Fund of America has a lot of attorneys who are assisting with both helping defend against criminal and civil charges. So if any of you need resources legal-wise, they're a great organization to look at as well. Mr. Basrawi?
Closing remarks.
I think just to close, to reiterate, our participation in America, in American civic life, in our government, and in our politics is an imperative. It's an imperative from our faith. And it comes from the basic principle of enjoining justice and warding off evil. And I think that so long as we are doing that and bringing our values, we are fulfilling that imperative. So I encourage all of you to consider public service, to go out into your communities, to encourage your communities in public participation.
Closing.
Let's get out and vote. Check out millionmuslimvotes.com. If you have an organization that would like to be a partner, become a partner. And let's really educate ourselves about the choices before us. Let's maintain the pressure on our elected today to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza today. Let's leverage all that we got in terms of resources as well as coalitions in support of this moment, but let's not lose sight that this is a generational struggle as well, and that is challenging. But let's make sure that as we move forward, that we don't enable the powers of white supremacy to come back to this country.
Yes to everything said. Process matters, and that ultimately we know that this life is temporary and that there is an afterlife, and that our work is meant to be a contribution and to an effort, and our efforts are things that are going to be judged. Success is not guaranteed to us, but what we must do is the best we can given the resources, time, intellect, health that we have, and contribute. And I hope that everyone stays spiritually grounded given all the challenges that we have to face, inshallah.
Thank you, Raheela.
Yes, oh, thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists for attending, and then thank you so much for our audience and for engaging and sending us questions. I hope you all enjoyed, and may Allah put a lot of barakah and knowledge in our efforts today. Thank you.
The 61st Annual ISNA Convention, the American Muslim, Forging Faith and Action.